So, Red Wings fans, it's been kind of a strange couple of years, hasn't it? Had some good, had some bad. Okay, let's be honest, mostly bad. Here's a fun thing. Do you guys feel like this? Or this? How about this? Well, don't worry, because I'm going to remind you of the good times. Psych! Gotcha! Oh. This was actually one of the better moments now looking back at the entire 10 years. In all seriousness, we often tend to consider a team's history only when it's really advantageous to us, right? We care about the good things, the Stanley Cups, the Lombardis, the anything else that you want to go for in terms of a championship. So what happens when you take a measured look at a team that you really enjoy, except you consider what exactly happened, say, 10 years ago? Ah, funny, you're watching a video about that. That's cool. Welcome to a quick, okay, maybe not so quick, look at the Red Wings from the years of 2013 to 2016. Let's take a look at where we were at that time, trying to remove exactly what happened in the last 5 years between Jeff Blashill and Ken Holland and Steve Yzerman's reign of the team. No, this is definitely not being recorded at the end of the project because I hated the old intro. What are you talking about? This season started with, as was somewhat expected at this point, excitement. The Wings had a fairly successful season the year before, not going super far into the playoffs, but losing to the eventual Stanley Cup champions in the Chicago Blackhawks in a tight Game 7 matchup, after leading the series 3-1, losing Game 7 in overtime. For the fans that followed this team during this time, I just gave you PTSD. I'm sorry. It will happen again. Just think about this year. The offseason had its questions, sure, but the lineup was still going to have its stars be in place. Henrik Zetterberg was still the captain and a dominating force on the ice. Pavel Datsyuk would continue to snap his opponent's ankles and make them disappear into the Shadow Realm. I mean, seriously, did the dude just levitate on the ice? Jimmy Howard would post the 9th highest save percentage in the NHL for goaltenders playing more than 10 games, and there was serious hope that Peter Mrazek would be able to step in and continue the high standards the team had for goaltending. The team also had its top-level players in Tomas Tatar, Johan Franzen, Gustav Nyquist, Niklas Kronwall. Even players like Danny DeKeyser looked poised to take their game into a higher gear. The Red Wings were looking at making the playoffs for a 23rd straight year, which had a lot of people asking, how does Detroit continue to be successful in a league that introduced a salary cap and 8 new teams? Mike Babcock continued to coach the team this year as he did since 2005, and while nowadays there's plenty of criticism to be said about his current, and now hopefully former, coaching style, he was a very respected coach during this time, and after leading the team to multiple Stanley Cup finals, including getting one in 2008, it seemed like this season would be business as usual, getting good results through the regular season and then making noise in the playoffs. That isn't to say that change wasn't coming in some big ways. The year before, there were rumblings about a new arena for the team, with Illich Enterprises, the owner of the Red Wings, announcing that they'd be bringing a new state-of-the-art multi-purpose event center to Detroit. And during the offseason, it was officially announced that the Red Wings would be using the new arena. We're just going to ignore the controversy of using public money for this project right now. We can talk about that at a later date. While Joe Louis Arena was and is still beloved by Red Wings fans, it was definitely a needed change. Joe Louis Arena was opened for hockey in December 27th of 1979, a game against the St. Louis Blues. The arena had lots of history around it, but its age was definitely showing. Concourses were packed for each game, almost uncomfortably so, and the modern amenities that new arenas had didn't exist in Joe Louis. The scoreboard was old enough that it still used light bulbs instead of LEDs. The shots on goal indicators were at the ends of the arena instead of on the scoreboard, and the video boards that showed things like stats and advertisements looked straight out of the early 90s. The arena had seen its upgrades over the years, but it was time for a new look. This was a year of big events for the Red Wings too, retiring Nicklas Lidstrom's number 5 to the rafters and hosting the 2014 Winter Classic at Michigan Stadium, bringing in the largest crowd for an NHL game ever at over 100,000 people. For now though, the Red Wings stayed on the warpath. It wasn't always smooth sailing. After a 9-5-2 start, the Wings would go 7 straight without a win, including an insane 5 straight overtime losses, 3 of which happened in the shootout. At least they got points! They'd right the ship though, at least somewhat, and at the trade deadline would end up with a record of 28, 21, and 12. Not a great record, holding the 5th position in the Atlantic, but still enough to be in the final wildcard spot at the time. They couldn't hold up though. Washington was right on top of them in the standings, and there were other teams looking for an opportunity to make it in. They would, once again, right the ship, get 11 more wins, capping off the season with a record of 39, 28, and 15. All things considered, not a great season, but shake it off, play some good playoff hockey. The Red Wings would go into the playoffs as the last team in, tying Columbus with 93 points, the other wildcard holder. However, the Red Wings would lose the first tiebreaker between the two, that being the number of regulation and overtime wins, which meant the Red Wings would be playing the best team of the Eastern Conference, the Boston Bruins, with an incredibly good record of 54, 19, and 9. The first game of the playoffs for the Red Wings would be a true test to see if they could get things done in the postseason. And
a nice drag ahead by Datsuk. Controls to the outside and shot one. He scores! With 3:01 to go in the third.
Datsuk scores the one and only goal of the game, some great goaltending and defensive play by Detroit, and the Wings escape in a 1-0 final for Game 1. Despite all of what happened this season, maybe we'd see some good playoff hockey and take a shot at a deep playoff run. Yeah, that happened. Boston would respond in Game 2 right away, scoring 2 in the first 11 minutes of play and never looked back. Detroit did get a goal in the second to make things interesting, but a responding goal and a quick one in the third made the game 4-1, something that the Red Wings just couldn't come back from. But hey, the series is 1-1, the Red Wings had gotten one on Boston ice, and now we're heading back to Detroit for the next 2 games. But the Boston Bruins weren't done. Something must have made Boston realize that they've got to make sure to stay the dominant team that they've been all year, or maybe the Red Wings just let off the gas. But Game 3 went to Boston in a 3-0 shutout, series now being 2-1. Gotta get Game 4 to keep the series close, otherwise you're going back to Boston with a chance for them to close the series out. For Game 4, the Red Wings took a note out of Boston's playbook and scored the first 2, although it took them 25 minutes to do so. It did look like the Red Wings may have had a chance to get another one at home and take the series back to Boston tied 2-2, which guaranteed another playoff game at Joe Louis Arena. Boston did get a goal in the second, but the Red Wings were going into the third leading by 1. Boston tied the game very quickly into the final frame though. All of a sudden it's 2-2. The third period ends that way. We head to overtime for the first time in this series. The Red Wings don't have odds on their side, as in the last 5 years, they have a record of 5-7 in playoff overtimes, but maybe they could sneak this one out.
Taken by Krejci, handed on across once more to Hamilton. Shooting one, directed, score! The overtime winner for the Bruins!
A tough Game 4 loss at home brought the series to a 3-1 lead for Boston, heading back to their home turf. You can probably guess what happens next. The Red Wings can't take another game at Boston, and are knocked out in the first round. Head coach Mike Babcock mentioned after this loss that the last 2 years, we've battled to get into the playoffs. To me, that's a measure of where we are. Instead of battling for the cup, we're battling to make the playoffs. There were clear signs that the Red Wings, while still known for being able to make the playoffs and contend, definitely were not the powerhouse they were in the late 2000s. Conventional wisdom said to build the team around the current core in the offseason and reload on the fly. Bring in prospects, maybe get some new players to slot in right away from the draft, and go from there. The offseason had some notable moments, the biggest being the selection of Dylan Larkin 15th in the draft. While it looked like a solid pick at the time, it was also a sign of things to come. This was the highest pick the Red Wings had used since 1991, when Martin LaPompe was selected at 10th overall. For anyone who doesn't know, the NHL works on a system that allows the worst teams to select the best draft picks, or at least you think, in hopes that this will cause the teams that struggled the year before to improve over time. So the Red Wings picking higher up had its concerns about the direction the team was going. Even so, while things looked bumpy this year, there wasn't any cause to panic. Ken Holland, the architect of the team over the last 20 years, signed a new deal with Detroit to stay as its GM for 4 more years through the 2017-18 season. Babcock didn't have a new deal coming into his last year of his contract, but once again, there wasn't really much concern on the coaching and front office side of things. There was even some news on the new arena as well, starting to get renders of the arena and what it'd look like, and a date for when the team would move in, 2017. The team, as it had for the last 20 years, had good things to look forward to. The beginning of the 2014-15 campaign went well for the Wings, ending up with the top spot in the Atlantic at the middle of December with a record of 17-7-7. They had been competing Tampa Bay, Montreal, and Toronto for that top spot, with only 2 points separating the 4 teams at that time. And while they'd keep up a decent record, Montreal and Tampa Bay would separate themselves from the pack. At the trade deadline on March 2nd, Detroit would hold the 3rd spot in the Atlantic pretty well with a record of 35-15-11, 10 points away from the 4th place Bruins. The day before, they had picked up Eric Cole from the Stars and Marek Zidlicki from the Devils, adding depth to the team going into the postseason. It looked as if this team had figured out the problems they had last year and were getting wins pretty handedly. They were preparing for another playoff push. There were some concerns. Team goaltending and defense had struggled compared to years past, having an average goals against compared to league average. But the offense continued to produce and would allow the Wings to make the playoffs, although it was close. The Red Wings would slip up in their final games, ending their season with a record of 43-25-14, only picking up 8 wins in their last 21. It was a little too close for comfort. Ottawa and Pittsburgh both grabbed playoff wildcards and were only 1 and 2 points behind the Wings respectively, which would have forced them to play the top teams in either Montreal or the New York Rangers. Instead, they'd play the 2nd seed of the Atlantic, the Tampa Bay Lightning. This was the first time in history Detroit would face Tampa Bay in the playoffs. And on top of that, this was against a team built by one of the Red Wings greats, Steve Yzerman. Quick history lesson. When Yzerman retired from playing in 2006, he joined the Red Wings as the team's vice president, working alongside Ken Holland. For the next 4 years that would be the case, but as Yzerman voiced wanting to run a team himself, Ken Holland had just signed a 4-year deal with the Red Wings, which paved the way for Yzerman to take the GM opening for the Tampa Bay Lightning. 5 years after taking that deal, he'd be facing his old team as an opponent in the playoffs for the first time. That year, Tampa was the most offensively potent team in the league, scoring 262 goals overall and taking the highest scoring team in the regular season. On paper, it looked like the Red Wings may struggle just like they did last year, but playoff hockey always tends to be a different animal. And it certainly looked like that was the case at the start of the series. Detroit would draw first blood in Game 1, but Tampa would score a shorthanded goal, ending the first 1-1. Detroit would come out hard in the second, resulting in a power play goal from Thomas Jurko 8 seconds into the period, after Anton Strawman took a goaltender interference penalty in the last minute of the first. Detroit would get a third in the third, and while Tampa made it interesting with a goal to cut the lead in half a few minutes later, Detroit would hold on and get Game 1 in Tampa, 3-2. Game 2 went less well for the Wings, with Tampa taking over the second period of that game with 3 goals, giving Tampa a 4-0 lead at the end of 2. Detroit would get 1 in the third, but the game would go to Tampa 5-1. A tied series going back to Detroit. Tell me where you've seen this before. Wouldn't happen like that this year, though. Detroit kept their foot on the gas and took Game 3 handedly, 3-0, giving Peter Mrazek his first NHL playoff shutout. And in Game 4, Detroit would score the first 2 goals and take a 2-0 lead into the second. It looked like the Red Wings may be able to bring a 3-1 series lead into Game 5 in Tampa. Yeah, no, you're watching a video on the recent history of the Red Wings. You know this won't have a happy ending. Tampa would rally to score 2 in a minute 23 in the third, sending the game to overtime. Less than 5 minutes in, Tyler Johnson would grab his 4th goal in as many games for Tampa, and we're heading back to Tampa, once again, with the series tied. Detroit, once again though, would not let this setback deter them. Game 5 in Tampa was a dominating win for Detroit, winning 4-0 and giving Mrazek another shutout, and Danny DeKeyser's only playoff goal in his career. I mean, yeah, it's an empty goal, but it still counts. With the series at 3-2, they'd go back to Detroit with the Red Wings having the chance to close out the series. For the fans that followed this team during this time, I just gave you PTSD. I'm sorry. It will happen again. Oh, that's right. Tampa would take a hold on the game after scoring the first 3, and after a penalty-filled night, would win the game 5-2. Game 7, back in Tampa. The last time Detroit was in a Game 7, they'd... Wait, what happened? I can't remember. I think we beat the Ducks in the first round, right? There was that San Jose loss in 2011, but 2010 it went okay against Phoenix. Yeah. I think this could go well. You already know how this ends. Despite a lockdown game with no score after 2, Tampa would take a 1-0 lead early into the third and wouldn't look back. Ben Bishop would play an incredible game, stopping all 31 shots he faced, and an empty netter would ice the game 2-0. Detroit was knocked out of the first round of the playoffs again. Tampa Bay, for what it's worth, would make a stab at the Cup that year, knocking out both Montreal and the Rangers to make the finals against Chicago. They would lose that series 4-2, but to the Wings this must have been a hard pill to swallow. If you win that Game 7, you have a chance to rally on and make it to the finals. But no dice this year. Reload on the fly, prepare for the next. Oh boy, now we get to talk about Jeff Blashill. Okay, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. After the 2015 playoffs, the Red Wings didn't have a head coach for the next year. With Mike Babcock and Ken Holland not coming to terms on a new contract, Babcock started searching around for another NHL team to coach, meaning that the Red Wings needed to find someone to take over at the bench. So, why not the fantastic head coach of the AHL affiliate of the Red Wings, the Grand Rapids Griffins? At the time, Blashill seemed like such an obvious choice. He brought Western Michigan University their winningest season they've had in 15 years during the 2010-11 season, was named Coach of the Year by USCHO, Inside College Hockey, and College Hockey News, led the Griffins to their first Calder Cup in 2013, and had even entered the Red Wings system as an assistant coach for Mike Babcock before he went over to coach Grand Rapids. It seemed like an amazing fit, allowing the Red Wings to bring in a known entity rather than having to find an NHL coach to slot in. While it was known well before that this would happen, on June 9th, 2015, Jeff Blashill was named the 27th head coach of the Detroit Red Wings.
This is one of the worst kept secrets in recent Red Wing history, but I'm here today to announce the 27th head coach in team history and introduce Jeff Blashill.
Now, I'm sure lots of you that know the Red Wings are all lambasting me for even mentioning Blashill's name here, but here's the thing. People actually liked this coaching change at the time. I'm not saying that people wanted Babcock out, but it felt like a fresh face that could help revitalize the team. I personally remember watching an interview of him and Babcock in the first game of the season and thinking to myself, wow, this guy sounds a lot like Babcock. I think we'll be in safe hands here. In fact, the start of the season went about as what you'd expect from the team, hitting Christmas Day with a record of 17-10-7, and despite being 4th in the Atlantic, only being 2 points away from the top of the division and the second seed in the conference. It seemed like this team was just fine with Blashill at the helm, at least compared to what we've been used to. We should discuss the other big thing that changed this year, Dylan Larkin. The 2014 first-round draft pick had played a few playoff games with the Griffins a year before, scoring 3 goals and picking up 2 assists in the 6 games that he played with the team, and was immediately slotted into the Red Wings lineup for the year ahead. It didn't take long for him to start making an impact, assisting on an applicator goal in the first, and then notching his first goal wearing the winged wheel 20 seconds into his second period of NHL hockey. Larkin looked to be a perfect addition to the team at the time, as some of the core was aging, notably Datsuk, who was considering retirement after this season with 2 more years being on his contract. However, there's an asterisk near all of these points here. The Red Wings were struggling to put up goals, and it was starting to show. Larkin was the highest goal scorer of the season, putting up 23, while Zetterberg and Datsyuk combined for 70 assists over the season, feeding the younger forwards. However, goals still came at a premium, being the 8th worst team for goals for in the NHL. Goaltending was another question mark. Peter Mrazek was having a solid year with a save percentage of .921 and a goals against of 2.33, but Howard was struggling in net. Nearing a save percentage of less than 900 and a GAA of 3, there was some concern that the $5 million cap hit goaltender signed through 2019 was now relegated to the backup position, while the starter was on a 1-year bridge deal worth less than $1 million. Not much happened at the deadline either, with the team receiving a 6th-rounder from Florida for the struggling Jakob Kindl, which just looked to be a cap dump. Other than that, nothing happened on the trade deadline, with the 25th straight season of playoffs on the line. At the time, Detroit had a record of 32, 20, and 11. And while holding the third in the Atlantic, Boston was right on their heels, only being 1 point behind, and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were not too far behind in the wildcard competition. Near the end of the season, there was serious concern that the playoff streak may end here. The Red Wings controlled their own destiny by holding the third in the Atlantic still, but with the way the Eastern Conference shook out, the Islanders and Flyers, who held the 4th and 5th spot in the Metro, looked poised to take both wildcard spots, which would leave the 4th in the Atlantic missing the dance. The second to last game of the season was a critical one, being against Boston, who was only 2 points behind them in the standings. Now, the Red Wings would win the tiebreaker against Boston if they were tied on points, and the Red Wings did have 2 extra regulation overtime wins compared to Boston going into today. But if they lost to Boston, it would be a much tougher path forward. They lost. That same day, Philadelphia got a single point against Toronto, bringing their points total to 92. Now remember, the Red Wings don't need to beat Philly on points. They were in different divisions. If they held the third in the Atlantic, or got the second wild card, they'd be okay. But let's assume the Red Wings don't get any more points. If Boston gets at least 1 point and Philadelphia gets 2, that puts both of those teams at 94, which would mean 4th in the Atlantic for the Red Wings and 3rd in the wildcard race. So the Red Wings didn't have the luxury to lose the next game. Otherwise, there's a possibility the playoff streak ends here. On the second to last day of the season, the Red Wings played the New York Rangers in Manhattan, and Boston played in TD Garden against the Ottawa Senators. The Senators were already knocked out, being 10 points behind both Boston and Detroit, so they had the option to play spoiler, but they didn't have much to play for beyond that. All Detroit had to do though was win this game, and they were in the playoffs. They lost again. The Red Wings, despite being in a playoff hunt, had only managed a record of 5-5-0 in their last 10, including failing to get a single point in their last 2 games that would have guaranteed them a playoff spot. To dig the knife in a bit more, in the final game, the Red Wings kept it close, with the game being at 1-1 going into the third, with New York getting a late goal in the dying minutes of the third to take the lead, and then grabbing an empty netter to seal it. Funnily enough, the Red Wings did actually score a goal afterwards to make the game end 3-2, but no points achieved. They'd probably need to rely on Boston failing to win their game at home to make their way into the playoffs. To the luck of Detroit, Boston failed to make anything happen in their game. Despite taking a 1-goal lead into the first intermission with a score of 1-0, Ottawa exploded for 4 goals in 8 minutes and 18 seconds to begin the second, and they never looked back, getting 2 more goals in the third. Empty netters? You're pulling the goalie with 10 minutes left to ice the game. The Red Wings, for all their struggles at the end of the season, backed their way into the playoffs for a 25th time straight, tying Boston on points and sneaking in on the tiebreaker. Just like last year, the Red Wings would play the second seed in the Atlantic, which just so happened to be Tampa Bay again. A chance at revenge last year, and a first chance for the new head coach, yeah, remember that? to show what he can have the team do in the playoffs. The first game in Tampa went back and forth. A goal by Tampa, 2 goals by Detroit, plenty of penalties at the halfway point, and a tying goal by Kucherov to make an eventful 2 periods end with the score tied at 2. A big chance for Detroit to jump out and steal a game in Tampa, but it wouldn't be happening. Killorn got the third of Tampa's goals 9 minutes in, and the game would finish under the score of 3-2. The second game is much more of the same, with Larkin getting his first and only postseason goal so far in his career. That statement should have terrified you. Welcome to the beginning of the end, folks. If you're new to this whole Red Wings thing, you're in for a hell of a time. But Tyler Johnson would get 2 goals in the third to let Tampa skate to a 5-2 victory. 2 games down, going back to Detroit. On a side note, the end of this game had 93 penalty minutes. Man, these teams really didn't like each other at this point. Made for some exciting hockey, at least that's for sure. Now, it looked like Detroit may have been able to regain a bit of ground here. As for Game 3, Mrazek returned to peak form and shut the door on everything Tampa threw at him. Athanasiou and Zetterberg both found the back of the net in the second, which caused a 2-0 victory for the Wings on home ice. Game 4 didn't look half bad either, except the Red Wings couldn't figure out how to stay out of the box, which resulted in Tampa taking a 2-0 lead halfway through the game, both on power play goals. Detroit had their chances too, though, and even though they didn't get any on the power play, they found a way to get the game tied, finding the second goal only 10 seconds before the second period ended. The third stayed scoreless for a long time, until the Lightning got their third power play goal of the night, breaking the tie with only 3 minutes to go. Tampa would shut it down after that, and just like that, we're going back to Tampa, series being 3-1. This isn't really a spoiler or anything. Obviously, the results of everything we're talking about is already decided. But think about this. The next game is, at the time of writing, the last time the Red Wings were in a playoff game. This is the most recent memory fans of the team currently have seeing Detroit on the postseason stage. It hasn't happened since. The game was a nail-biter, with no score after 2 full periods of play. Even with the time winding down in regulation, it looked like it was almost a certainty we were going to overtime. Unfortunately for the Red Wings, Alex Killorn would notch his third of the series with less than 2 minutes left in the game. The Red Wings and their defense didn't slouch back and allow this to happen, but Ben Bishop had an incredible night, stopping all 34 shots he faced, and the Lightning would even hold off a late power play chance for the Wings. The game ended 1-0, and the Red Wings would be knocked out of the playoffs in the first round for the 3rd year in a row. To say the second half of this year was a bumpy one would be an understatement. The team was less than stellar going into the final stretch of the season, only managed 1 win against a team they took to Game 7 a year ago, and there were some serious questions on what to do with the aging core. It was still a bit early to fully judge Blashill, but there was now some more serious concern on what exactly was going to happen for the Wings long term. How does the playoff streak continue? Who do you add to make the team better? Can you even do that with the current cap hit of the team? A lot of questions needed answering going into next season, and for the first time in the last 20 or so years, the Red Wings definitely look to be in trouble for the future. Hi there, thanks for watching. If you liked it, you could give it a like and a subscribe. Okay. Realistically, I'm not here to make anything on YouTube. I'm just kind of here to talk about things that I like. And the Red Wings are one of those things, and they drive me absolutely insane. If you're here for just the video and have gotten what you want, go ahead and take off. Thanks for watching. For anyone else that's curious, just gonna let you know what exactly is coming ahead here. So, I have a plan to go through every single season for the Red Wings up to, obviously, the current year, which, at the time of me recording, is the 2023-24 season, which I'm sure all of us have feelings and opinions on. I certainly do, and actually, the script for that is almost completely done. There's just a couple of other things that I want to get through and make sure everything's kind of lined up as I expect. As for all the other years, I know I've got points and things that I want to go over, but honestly, those are probably going to take me a little longer. It took me a little bit to get through this. You can probably tell that the script was written, especially back for the 2013-14 season. It was written a while ago. We had some false optimism on what exactly the current season, or last season rather, was going to be like. So definitely a little slow in this whole thing. This is not. I've got my full-time job. I'm not trying to move over to do something completely different and just do YouTube full-time. Don't expect that. So if you enjoyed it, thanks. Glad that you're sticking around and listening to me yap about all of this and what exactly is coming forward. But hopefully you do throw me a subscription or something, so that way you know when exactly the next video is uploaded. Don't expect it to be anytime soon. Quite honestly, you might not even get the next video until this new season starts. But yeah, we'll see what happens, how this goes. It's a ton of fun making, and yeah, see you next time.